You have heard it said, but I say, in the name of the one who calls us higher, Amen. Which would you say is the correct end to crack open a soft-boiled egg? Your answer puts you on one side or the other of an escalating war in the story of Gulliver's Travels, written in 1725 by Deacon of the Anglican Church, Jonathan Swift. Which way would you say is the correct way to eat your buttered bread? With the butter side up or the butter side down? Your answer puts you on one side or the other of an escalating war, even a mutually assured destruction, in the story of the Butter Battle book, written in 1984 in the midst of the Cold War by Dr. Seuss. Retaliation goes hand in hand with escalation. 500 years before the Bible was transferred from an oral tradition into a written word, the words that Jesus quotes in today's gospel were written down in writing 500 years ahead of the Bible. Those words, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, appear in written form 1,800 years before Jesus quoted them. Where do they come from? They were written into the ancient code of Hammurabi, the king of Babylon, 3,800 years ago, around the time that the grandson of Abraham got a new name, the name Israel, meaning struggle with God, Israel. Of course, Jesus quotes the words in order to urge his followers to go way beyond them. You have heard it said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, but I say, if anyone strikes you on the right cheek, turn the other also, etc. Few passages of the New Testament have more of the essence of the Christian ethic in them than this one. Here is the conduct which should distinguish the disciple of Christ from others. The law that Jesus is citing is known as the lex talionis, and it may be described as the law of tit for tat. Because of the way it is critiqued by Jesus, and especially by the commentaries of Jesus' words, this law is often considered as an example of the merciless laws of the Old Testament, even though it actually came from Hammurabi. But before we criticize ourselves, let's take note. The lex talionis, the law of tit for tat, so far from being a merciless law, was in fact the beginning of mercy. Its original aim was clearly the limitation of retaliation. In the very earliest days, the vendetta and the blood feud were characteristic of tribal society. If a man of one tribe injured a man of another tribe, then at once all the members of the tribe of the injured man were out to retaliate against all the members of the tribe of the man who committed the injury. Retaliation has escalation built into it. This new law, enacted by Hammurabi so long ago, deliberately limits retaliation. It lays it down that only the man who committed the injury must be punished, and his punishment must be no more than the equivalent of the injury he has inflicted or the damage he has done. Seen against its historic setting, this is not a merciless law, but a law of mercy. In essence, this principle of an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth addresses a basic human need for retribution or retaliation to address a wrong. It places limits on the escalation of that response. The retaliation must be balanced, equal to the offense, an eye for an eye, no more than that, a tooth for a tooth, not more. The lex talionis was a tremendous improvement over unbridled retaliation. It was a leap forward for justice in society. But Jesus understood that it is almost impossible to limit retaliation once it starts rolling. It has to escalate. It always does, as Dr. Seuss described in the Butter Battle book. If you haven't read it, I recommend it. The Yooks and the Zooks. Quite interesting. Essentially, Jesus makes it crystal clear retaliation has no place in the Christian life. Why is this? Because it is replaced in the Christian's life by forgiveness, a principle which Christ showed us from the cross when, in a time of his most excruciating pain, ex cruce, from the cross, literally, his most excruciating pain, said, "Father, forgive them. They know not what they do." Where does this word of Jesus leave us this morning? It clarifies what being a disciple of Christ means as opposed to being just a Christian. It leaves us in a place that the keynote speaker at last night's Harambe fundraiser explained. There are many Christians, but not so many disciples. Or, as the head of the school at Harambe also said last night, in Christianity, you don't get to keep your life. You don't get to keep your life. If you try, you will lose it. And vice versa, happily. Forgiveness instead of retaliation. Amazing New Testimony, amazing New Testament. Forgiveness, not retaliation. We all know that this is not easy. It flies in the face of all our natural human feelings, revenge, retaliation, vengeance. But nevertheless, it is what we are called to do if we call ourselves more than Christians, that is, disciples of Jesus Christ. If we are his disciples, then we try to the best of our ability to live by the principles that he has taught us. You've heard it said, but I say. And one of the most basic is forgiveness, a principle that can only be achieved through faith, as the Amish demonstrated so well some 10 years ago. It was October 2nd, 2006, that Charles Roberts entered a small Amish schoolhouse and shot 10 little girls, killing 5 and seriously wounding 5 before committing suicide right there. The fact that we don't remember his name, I believe, is because of the Amish response. The emphasis on forgiveness and reconciliation in the response of that Amish community to this tragedy was awesome. Truly awesome to behold. But there are some additional details. An initial response was the excruciating lament, particularly of the women who gathered in the culture and society separately from the men, followed by a gathering of young Amish men, accompanied by shouts of anger, of a milling around, and the words in that Germanic language not clearly understood, since the press had at least obeyed the elders by staying back at a distance. Then it was observed that the elders entered the group of the men, and the wives of the elders entered the group of the women. And there was an amazing silence. A grandfather of one of the murdered girls was heard speaking in English to not hate the killer. We must not think evil of this man. A bereaved Amish father noted he had a mother and a wife and a soul, and now he's standing before a just God. Now he's standing before a just God. In other words, he acknowledged that judging Charles Roberts was not his place. It belonged only to God, the just judge. The Amish father believed that the responsibility of the community was to offer that man and his family, they reached out to the family of Charles, one thing: forgiveness. This is based, of course, on their belief that in order to be forgiven by God of their own transgressions, they must be willing to forgive others. I'm convinced that the response of the Charleston community after the tragedy there was inspired by that Amish community. Is it possible that in your own life you are dealing with a situation that challenges your own faith because it challenges your ability to forgive? Is that possible? Are you a disciple or just a Christian? You have heard it said, but I say, in the name of the one who calls us higher,